Lawyers, what detail would make you unbeatable in court if your client had mentioned it in time? Story 1. I'm a public defender in an area with lots of substance use. Substances make most people talk. A lot. So I can't tell you how many clients forget to mention that they got to the jail still under the influence and called their mom/girlfriend/buddy on the recorded jail phone and not only confessed to the crime, but also brainstormed whatever alibi or version of events I'm relying on to defend them. Edit. I'm seeing this question a lot, so I'll add some info here. This is not legal advice, just explaining things a bit more. Calls to a lawyer are privileged and generally go through dedicated lines that aren't recorded, depending on the facility. Calls to family, friends, etc., through the normal phones are not privileged, are generally recorded, and can be used in court. There are usually printed signs near the phones and a recorded warning before each call that this is the case. Story 2. Employment law matter. He claimed to have been unfairly dismissed over bogus performance management. The real reason: he organized via an online service to have someone collect a box of his bodily fluids from a children's playground. There were explicit messages from him asking what they did with it and whether they engaged in certain acts with it. The employer provided us the messages. Edit. He was doing this on company time. Story 3. Case as a paralegal. Negligence case. Client argued that a lack of streetlights and a cyclist he couldn't see was responsible for him hitting a wire pole. Upon discovery, the first respondent's report indicated that they found the driver in the driver's seat, pants down, with adult material playing on the phone. Wasn't difficult to figure out who was negligent at that point. Story 4. Had a woman with an expensive fur coat and she claimed that the laundry ruined it. It was kinda ruined, but the laundry claimed those stains were already there. Judge ordered an expert opinion lab, and the fur coat had traces of cocaine and other illegal substances all over it. There was a raid at her place then, and her husband got convicted because they found several kilograms of substances. Story 5. Not mine, but my mentor. This is the reason you never ask questions that you don't already know the answer to in court. During the trial with the judge on a divorce matter, the wife brought up that he had abused her during the course of their marriage. Client whispers to my mentor that that is absolutely not true. On the stand, during his portion of testimony, my mentor asks, "At any point in the marriage, did you lay your hands on your wife?" One time we were having an argument and I held her down on the couch until she stopped arguing with me. What? My mentor said it was like she could see it happening in slow motion, and all the alarm bells were going off in her head because he had never mentioned this, and, apparently, to him, this was not abuse. The judge gave wife a lot more money as a result, and husband was baffled. My mentor was fuming. Edited to add, husband admitted this was the only time he had laid hands on wife. My mentor was more peeved because she had thought the case was in the bag, since wife had abandoned the kids with husband to run off with her lover down in Florida, and literally only came back to the state to get the divorce done. Husband had been noted as being a great dad to the kids and a good figure in the community, hence why she was so damn shocked at his answer. Story 6. This one ended my marriage. Well, it was the start of the end of marriage. My husband lost his job in the title/mortgage business. Applied for unemployment. Got denied. I decided to help him with his appeal hearing. I asked him multiple times before the hearing, "Is there anything you did that caused them fire you?" He says no, absolutely not. They fired him out of nowhere. Hearing day comes. He testifies. Story 7. Not my client, but the son of the opposing party, and presumably the party himself, lied about being blind to make himself seem more sympathetic as a witness. We didn't know either until he took the witness box. Their counsel asked him to take the oath, and he picked the card up and read it. That was the cherry on top of a series of ridiculous events. The judge dismissed the whole thing in our client's favor shortly after. I was a trainee at the time, but my boss, who was in her late 60s then, said it was the most ridiculous case she'd ever handled. Story 8. Not me, but my dad represented a guy in a civil case. He doesn't normally do criminal law, but in this instance, the question of a forged signature came up, and his client lied, saying he didn't forge it. My dad was very clear in explaining that admitting to him wouldn't land him in jail, it would just allow him to build a better defense, but he still denied forgery, and so my dad rolled with it. He said his case was completely cut up once it came out that yes, in fact, his client did forge the signature. Guys and gals, your lawyers aren't a snitch, they're trying to get you the best possible result. Always be honest to your lawyer. Story 9. Guy in prison hired me to request a modification of his sentence because he was doing very well, completing a lot of optional programs, no rule violations, etc. He had his family come in and pay and everything to get started. I asked the family and the client if he had requested modification before, because the law said that for his conviction, he could only request modification twice for any one sentence, regardless of if they were granted or denied. Swore up and down he'd never filed before. You can see where this is going. After spending a few hours going over records and preparing documents, a copy of the CCS, the case record basically, finally arrived. He'd personally filed for modification 6 times, since he was sentenced with handwritten pleadings that were all denied. So the one he hired me for was a waste of time and would never be considered at all. Story 10. Friend of mine is a defense attorney. He was representing a guy with a lengthy record for assault. Basically, this guy took an air conditioning unit and threw it at his girlfriend. My buddy tells me he was able to get a plea deal for 1 year probation, no jail time. The judge is all ready to accept the deal when he asks the defendant if he had anything he would like to say. The defendant responds, "Yay, I don't know why they charging me with assault. I never touched her. I just threw an air conditioning unit at her. This is crap." Judge rescinded plea deal because of defendant's attitude/lack of remorse, went to trial, and got a year in jail. Story 11. Not a lawyer but going to law school. I worked for a defense attorney who did a lot of federal work. One of our cases was with this guy charged with sex trafficking of minors. We met him at the prison to interview him, and he swore up and down he had nothing to do with this, and that he didn't even know the girls. A month or so later, heaps of evidence from the United States Attorney's Office comes in, and it's pages of Snapchat messages and texts between him and these girls, video confessions from every co-defendant and victim saying our guy was the ringleader, proof of him checking in/out of different motel rooms, etc. We showed him the evidence, and he claimed his co-defendants were conspiring against him. He continued to deny everything and wanted to go to trial, but we repeatedly told him that would not be wise because of all the evidence against him. He ended up requesting a new attorney to be appointed, claiming that we were, quote, ineffective. To this day, my old boss and I reminisce about how difficult this client was when we catch up on the phone. Story 12. I was actually on a jury. Guy was suing a business, said he got injured, couldn't work for 3 years. Defense counsel, sir, isn't it true that you spent 18 of those months in prison for armed robbery? Edit for more info. Guy was saying he was shopping at a major grocery store chain and slipped in some water on the ground in front of a freezer. Guy has cell phone video his wife made of him in the water, and we could hear her saying that the water wasn't showing up on video and to splash it with his hand so it would look better in the video. It also came out that he'd had 3 prior convictions for crimes of dishonesty. That may not be the exact term, but something similar, for things like shoplifting and other petty crimes. Second edit for more info while I'm on my lunch break. Guy was representing himself pro se. Defense counsel asked him if his inability to work could be from the 2 previous knee injuries he'd had. When asked how they knew about those injuries, he was told his previous lawyer had given the defense his medical records upon request. Guy wanted to enter his magnetic resonance imagings as evidence, but had no one there as an expert witness to explain to the jury what they showed. He wanted to show us what the results were. Story 13. Lawyer in the United Kingdom. I acted for a member of a famous predator hunting group. My client was charged with various offenses relating to his vigilantism, most seriously, causing grievous bodily harm with intent. He wanted me to fight the case on a public interest defense point that is not available to him in statute or at common law, contrary to my advice. I followed his instructions as I'm bound to do. If the state won't punish predators properly, then it's left to men like my client to take the law into their own hands. A crap argument for a whole host of reasons. His laptop was seized by police and submitted for forensic examination. He had a staggeringly huge database of child abuse material on it. He himself was a massive predator. Edit. Spelling. Edit 2. Spelling again. Story 14. My father is a judge. I remember him talking about a case where a woman was suing for a severe back injury that she said was preventing her from working and taking care of her kids, and so on. In the middle of the trial, a pen rolled off the table and she is bending over trying to reach it from her chair, but pen was too far away, so she stands up and bends over and picks it up and goes back to her seat as if nothing is out of the ordinary. My dad is just looking at her and she snaps at my dad and goes, "What are you staring at?" My dad asked her if she was the woman with the alleged back injury, and her response was that she was fine. Her attorney leaned over and said something to her, and she then loudly started complaining about her back and how much her back hurt, but no one believed her. Story 15. Not me, but my legal studies teacher, who used to be a lawyer, was representing a woman suing a supermarket for a slip that caused her to hurt her shoulder. She had to tell the court how much it had impacted life, and the fact that she couldn't do her everyday tasks. She said, "I can't even lift my arms like this to hang the washing," and proceeded to show the court the exact gesture in perfect form that she was explaining she, quote, couldn't do. Story 16. I was approached by this attorney to work for him for free to go after smugglers. This guy had been arrested for dumping goods onto American markets that violated trade agreements. In his arrest, a bunch of goods were left in warehouses to rot, and their owners, his clients, were never paid. This attorney showed me that this smuggler had assets, and that he could sue to recover for his clients. Story 17. During a civil trial for injuries and property damage from a motor vehicle accident, the defendant, charged with driving under the influence, denied any prior incidents during preparation. On the stand, plaintiff's counsel revealed a prior driving under the influence conviction in another state where a child died, shocking the courtroom and leading to significant damage to the defendant's case. The defendant had claimed it was a one-time mistake, but this revelation, including the question about remembering the child's name, sealed a negative outcome. Story 18. In a divorce case involving asset splitting, the couple secretly reconciled a couple of days prior but did not inform their attorneys or the judge. After 4 days of evidence and expert testimonies, it was revealed right before closing arguments, leading one attorney to withdraw and the judge to dismiss the jury. The couple insisted they didn't think it was a detail their attorneys needed to know, causing significant disruption. Story 19. A public defender's client, charged with substance offenses, claimed she had no substances on her when arrested, leading the lawyer to plan a defense around this. It later emerged she had just sold the substances to an undercover cop, a critical detail she failed to mention, undermining the defense strategy and likely affecting the case outcome. Story 20. In an unfair dismissal case, the client claimed she was fired due to racism and poor performance, but failed to disclose she was running her own accounting business using her employer's premises and facilities during work hours. This came out during the case, and while she received a small settlement due to procedural errors in her firing, it was far less than what she sought, given the true reason for dismissal. Story 21. In a quiet title case seeking an implied easement, the client failed to mention that the property was conveyed to a defunct corporation in the late 1950s, which lacked legal capacity to act, making the conveyance void. This critical detail, not checked due to limited historical records, undermined the case, as the lawyer had taken the client's word that the corporation was active at the time. Story 22. In a speeding case, the client failed to mention she was driving 70 miles per hour up an unplowed snow lane to pass slower cars, a detail the lawyer only learned in court. The officer had already given her a break by not charging reckless driving, and the judge refused to reduce the ticket, leaving the lawyer surprised she omitted such a significant detail during consultation, affecting the case's outcome. Story 23. In a car accident case, a woman sued for $40,000 claiming migraines and shoulder issues prevented her from caring for her disabled son, but it emerged she had referrals and specialist visits for these issues 6 months before the accident. This pre-existing condition, which she failed to mention, led to the case being immediately closed, undermining her claim. Story 24. In a substance possession case, the defendant was charged after substances were found in a police vehicle after his transport. The officer testified he routinely checked the vehicle, but the defense attorney, not knowing, asked if anyone else was in the back seat, revealing the defendant's girlfriend was also there, a detail not in the report or mentioned by the client. This created reasonable doubt, leading to a not guilty verdict. Story 25. In a custody case, the client failed to tell the lawyer about a previous felony child abuse conviction for causing serious bodily harm to an infant, a critical detail that likely impacted the case negatively. The omission was significant, as it would have affected the lawyer's strategy and the court's perception of the client's fitness for custody. Story 26. During a minor infraction case for drunk in public, the client told his lawyer he was very drunk, but waiting in the lobby of his brother's apartment, which was secured for guests and residents only. The lawyer prepared to argue this, bringing photos and bylaws to court. However, during the trial, the officer testified the client was encountered outside at a call box of a different apartment building miles away, rambling and barely able to stand. The client then admitted he meant to go to his brother's apartment but got the location wrong, and his brother sounded angry on the phone. The case resulted in a guilty finding, a minor fine, and wasted effort on useless exhibits. Story 27. I'm a court-appointed attorney for qualifying individuals in family matters. Termination of parental rights case. Have been fighting to argue that parent is stable, working lawfully, has a suitable apartment, doesn't need psychotropic medications anymore, ready to be a parent, etc. After a few months of negotiating with all the parties in Department of Children Court Services, we have a pre-trial to try and convince guardians. I meet with my client before the hearing to see if anything changed. Nope, all good, let's get my kids. Great, that's not happening today, but let's try. We get going in court. My client, who is super hot-headed and quick to anger, gets riled up and goes off on the guardians, screaming in open court. It doesn't end there, but reveals 1. That no longer is working. 2. No longer in apartment. 3. Doesn't want to have a relationship with guardians, despite her kids loving them. 4. Won't send her kids pictures of the toys they miss and can't have. 5. Plans on moving out of state. 6. Thinks they can live as a family off of state aid when she gets them back. And is 4 months pregnant. All in the matter of 15 seconds. I was too shocked to even react. Speechless. Not the image of stability and parental fitness I've been trying to paint since last July. Edit to clarify. Client was working really hard to get everything right, and legitimately had everything going for her prior to this hearing. I was not making false representations or trying to get a monster reinstated. This was a true bombshell, as I did my due diligence to make sure things were on the up and up and statutory requirements were met. Things fell apart very fast, apparently. This was a very atypical situation. Parents typically do a really good job working hard to meet their requirements. Story 28. I heard of a guy trying to appeal his disability benefit being revoked. He was supposedly a paraplegic, but the opposition had over 10 minutes of video footage of him walking, running, and even jumping over a fence. After the 1-minute mark, the judge said, quote, "Okay, I've seen enough. Please leave." Story 29. Credit card theft/fraud case. When I was a young lawyer back in the late 80s, I was trying this guy on a credit card case, and the witness was the department store clerk. Before video surveillance, the state relied heavily on witness identification. As she described the customer that was purchasing the very unique clothing her store sold, I asked her, how could she be so sure it was my client? She looked at my client, who was wearing the most obnoxiously yellow shirt imaginable, and said, because not only does he completely match the description I just gave you, but he's wearing the exact same shirt I sold him. The jury convicted him, and I learned that day to better prepare my clients for trial. Story 30. My house was robbed. In addition to all the stuff the thief took, he also stole a bunch of my suits and all of my neckties. I had a big collection, like 100 or so. However, the thief left fingerprints on a hard plastic box that I kept spare change in. Fast forward 3 months. The thief is caught in the act of robbing another house in the same neighborhood, same detectives on my case, and this new theft. They fingerprint the guy, and the fingerprints match the ones from my house. At the thief's arraignment, I see him stroll in wearing my suit and my tie. I tell the district attorney. He says there's really no way to prove it. However, the tie he chose to wear was a one-of-kind street map of San Francisco, and I still had all the documentation to prove it. The district attorney's eyes widen, and he informs the judge. Story 31. There's so many. My dude in a custody battle where the opposing party claims he has a drinking problem and he denies it 1,000%. Even after the real talk I have with him, asking him to not hide stuff from me, and to be honest, we go into court, and at cross-examination the opposing party provides video evidence of him finishing work, driving to an abandoned parking lot to drink a few tall boys, and then going to pick up his kid from school. Every single access visit. He not only didn't tell me that, he forgot to mention that his ex's brother owns a private investigator firm. Story 32. Came out in open court that my client's brother was her child's father. She'd been super dodgy about dad's identity, and this was a restraining order hearing against brother. Story 33. I represented a client who was suing for jaw and mouth-related injuries. I retained her regular dentist to testify as her expert witness. 2 days before our impending trial, my client casually mentions that she will be arriving at the courthouse with her dentist because they had become romantically involved and lived together for the past a year. She had more than a year at her disposal to tell me this little bit of wonderful news, and so I immediately became more agreeable to a last-minute pretrial settlement. Story 34. Recently had a client's fact witness, an employee of the client, reveal at his deposition that he had signed an agreement which pays him a substantial bonus if the client wins the lawsuit. Our jaws dropped. How can you possibly give believable factual testimony at trial if you stand to earn a windfall if one side prevails? Ugh. Story 35. Cue me, who has never heard him mention having other kids. Turned out, yeah, completely abandoned them, has had no contact for years, never made any efforts. Please give your lawyer important information, especially if another party involved knows your secrets. Story 36. In a personal injury case, my client was suing for severe back pain after a workplace accident, claiming he could barely move or work. We had a strong case built around his testimony and medical records. During cross-examination, the defense pulled up a recent social media video of him competing in an amateur bodybuilding competition, deadlifting over 400 pounds with no visible discomfort. He never mentioned he was still training, let alone competing. The case settled for pennies because his credibility was shot. Story 37. I was defending a guy in a theft case involving high-end electronics from a store. He swore he was nowhere near the scene and had an alibi of being at home with his girlfriend. We were ready to push that defense until the prosecution presented security footage showing him not only in the store, but wearing a distinctive jacket he claimed he'd lost months earlier. When I confronted him, he shrugged and said, "Oh yeah, I forgot I went shopping that day. The plea deal was the best we could salvage." Story 38. In a divorce case, my client was fighting for custody of his 2 kids, presenting himself as a stable, hands-on dad. He never mentioned that he'd been investigated by Child Protective Services twice in the past year for leaving the kids unattended overnight while he was at a casino. The ex-wife's attorney brought it up in court with documented reports, and it completely derailed our case. He thought it wasn't a big deal because the kids were fine. Story 39. I represented a small business owner sued for breach of contract over undelivered goods. He insisted he'd fulfilled the order, and the client was lying to get a refund. During discovery, the opposing side produced emails from my client apologizing for the delay and admitting he'd oversold his inventory and couldn't deliver. When I asked why he didn't tell me, he said, "I didn't think those emails mattered." We had to settle to avoid a worse judgment. Story 40. In a driving under the influence case, my client claimed he hadn't been drinking and was just tired when pulled over. I prepared a defense around the officer's lack of probable cause. At trial, the prosecution played dashcam footage where my client, after being pulled over, casually told the officer he'd had a couple beers at the bar. He never mentioned this conversation to me, thinking it was just small talk. The jury didn't buy our defense after that. Story 41. I was working on a wrongful termination case where my client, a factory worker, claimed she was fired for unionizing efforts. She presented a clean story of being a model employee. In court, the employer's attorney produced a written warning she'd received for stealing company materials to sell online. She admitted to me later she forgot about the warning because she didn't think it was serious. It undermined her credibility, and we lost the case. Story 42. In a landlord-tenant dispute, my client, the tenant, claimed the landlord failed to fix a leaking roof, causing damage to her belongings. She provided photos and seemed convincing. During the trial, the landlord's attorney showed a signed lease addendum where my client agreed to take responsibility for roof repairs in exchange for lower rent. She never mentioned this addendum, claiming she, quote, didn't read it closely. The case was dismissed. Story 43. I defended a client in a domestic violence case where he insisted the incident was a one-time misunderstanding and his partner exaggerated. We built a defense around lack of intent. In court, the prosecution introduced text messages he sent to his partner afterward, threatening to make her regret calling the cops. He never told me about the texts, thinking they were private. The judge was not impressed, and he got a harsher sentence. Story 44. In a fraud case, my client was accused of scamming investors in a startup. He claimed it was all legit, and the investors were just upset about losses. During discovery, the prosecution produced a recorded phone call where he laughed about taking their money and running. He didn't mention the call, assuming it wasn't recorded because it was off the record. We had to pivot to damage control and take a plea. Story 45. I was handling a child support modification case where my client, the father, claimed he couldn't afford payments due to job loss. He swore he was unemployed and living off savings. In court, the mother's attorney presented his recent LinkedIn profile, updated to show he'd started a new, high-paying job 2 months earlier. He said he forgot to mention the job because it was new. The judge denied the modification and increased his payments. In a slip-and-fall case, my client claimed she injured her knee after tripping on a store's uneven floor, seeking damages for medical bills and lost wages. She swore the injury was new and debilitating. During cross-examination, the defense presented Instagram posts from a week after the incident showing her running a 5-kilometer race, smiling and uninjured. She never mentioned the race, saying she, quote, didn't think it was relevant. The case collapsed, and we settled for almost nothing. Story 47. I was defending a client charged with shoplifting high-value jewelry. He insisted he'd bought the items elsewhere and was just browsed the store. We prepared a defense based on mistaken identity. In court, the prosecution showed security footage of him slipping the jewelry into his pocket, and it turned out he was wearing a bracelet from the store's collection during our meetings. He claimed he forgot he was wearing it. The plea deal was our only option. Story 48. In a custody dispute, my client, a mother, portrayed herself as the primary caregiver with a stable home. She never mentioned she'd been evicted from her apartment a month earlier and was couch-surfing with her kids. The father's attorney brought up the eviction notice and testimony from her landlord, which tanked her credibility. She thought it wasn't a big deal since she was figuring it out. We lost primary custody. Story 49. I represented a client in a breach of contract case over a failed construction project. He claimed the client refused to pay for completed work. During discovery, the opposing side produced text messages where my client admitted to cutting corners on materials to save costs, leading to the project's failure. He didn't tell me about the texts, saying he thought they were private. We had to settle to avoid a bigger loss. Story 50. In a driving under the influence case, my client swore he only had one drink hours before driving and was pulled over for a broken taillight. I built a defense around improper stop procedures. At trial, the prosecution played body cam footage where he admitted to a few shots at a party right before driving. He didn't mention this, thinking it was just a casual comment. The jury convicted him quickly. Story 51. I was handling a wrongful termination lawsuit where my client claimed she was fired for whistleblowing on unsafe practices. She presented herself as a diligent employee. In court, the employer's attorney showed she'd been disciplined multiple times for tardiness and falsifying time cards, which she never disclosed. She said she forgot about the warnings because they were unfair. The case was dismissed. Story 52. In a tenant-landlord dispute, my client claimed the landlord illegally locked him out of his apartment. We prepared to argue unlawful eviction. During the hearing, the landlord's attorney produced a signed agreement where my client sublet the apartment without permission, violating the lease. He didn't mention the subletting, claiming it was just a friend staying over. The judge ruled against us. Story 53. I defended a client in an assault case where he claimed self-defense against a stranger. We built a solid case until the prosecution revealed the stranger was his ex-girlfriend's new partner, and my client had sent threatening voicemails days earlier. He didn't tell me about the relationship or voicemails, thinking they, quote, weren't important. The self-defense argument fell apart, and he took a plea. Story 54. In a fraud case involving a fake charity, my client insisted he was just a volunteer misled by the organizer. During trial, the prosecution produced bank records showing he was receiving large wire transfers from the charity's account. He never mentioned the payments, saying he thought they were reimbursements. We had to pivot to a plea deal to limit his exposure. Story 55. I was working on a personal injury case where my client claimed a car accident caused chronic neck pain, preventing her from working. She didn't mention she'd been in a similar accident a year earlier with the same symptoms, already documented by her doctor. The defense brought this up, showing her condition predated our case. She said she didn't think it mattered. The settlement was minimal. Story 56. I was defending a client in a hit-and-run case where he claimed he didn't know he hit anyone and was just driving home. We built a defense around lack of intent and no witnesses. In court, the prosecution produced a 911 call he made from the scene, admitting he clipped a guy but panicked and drove off. He never told me about the call, saying he forgot because he was stressed. The case went south fast, and he took a plea. Story 57. In a breach of contract case, my client, a contractor, swore he completed a home renovation as agreed and the homeowner was just nitpicking. We were ready to fight for full payment. During discovery, the homeowner's attorney showed photos of shoddy work and emails where my client admitted to missing deadlines due to taking on another job. He didn't mention the emails, claiming they were no big deal. We settled for half the claim. Story 58. I represented a client in a custody battle, presenting her as a stable parent with a steady job. She failed to mention she'd been arrested for public intoxication 2 weeks earlier at her workplace, which the ex-husband's lawyer brought up with police reports. She thought it wasn't relevant, since it was just one night. The judge questioned her stability, and she lost primary custody. Story 59. In a personal injury lawsuit, my client claimed a slip at a grocery store caused a severe ankle injury, preventing him from working. We had medical reports to back it up. The defense showed surveillance footage of him playing soccer with friends a week after the incident. He never mentioned he was still active, saying he thought it was obvious he could still move. The case was dismissed. Story 60. I was defending a client charged with vandalism for spray painting a public building. He claimed it was a case of mistaken identity, and he was home that night. During trial, the prosecution presented a social media post he made that night, bragging about tagging the building with his signature graffiti style. He didn't tell me about the post, thinking it was just joking online. He got community service after a plea. Story 61. In a wrongful eviction case, my client, a tenant, claimed the landlord changed the locks without notice. We prepared to argue illegal eviction. The landlord's attorney produced a text exchange where my client begged for an extension on rent, admitting he hadn't paid in 3 months. He didn't share the texts, saying he forgot because he was embarrassed. The judge ruled in the landlord's favor. Story 62. I handled a case where my client sued a company for defective equipment that caused an injury. He insisted the equipment was brand new and failed due to poor manufacturing. During cross-examination, the defense showed a purchase receipt proving the equipment was second-hand and out of warranty. He didn't mention buying it used, thinking it didn't matter. The case was weakened, and we settled low. Story 63. I was defending a client in a theft case, where he claimed he found a wallet on the street and was planning to return it. We built a defense around lack of intent to steal. The prosecution then presented automated teller machine footage of her using the wallet's credit cards at multiple stores. She didn't tell me she used the cards, claiming she, quote, meant to pay it back. The jury convicted her quickly. Story 64. I was working on a divorce case where my client wanted spousal support, claiming he had no income after leaving his job to support his wife's career. During the hearing, the wife's attorney presented tax returns, showing he'd been running a side business for years, earning substantial cash under the table. He didn't mention it, saying it was just a hobby. The judge denied his support claim. Story 65. In an assault case, my client claimed he acted in self-defense during a bar fight, saying the other guy attacked him first. We prepared a strong defense until the prosecution showed bar security footage, where my client threw the first punch after a heated argument. He didn't mention starting the fight, claiming he, quote, thought it was obvious who was right. He took a plea to avoid a worse outcome. Story 66. I was defending a client in a burglary case, where he swore he was at a friend's house playing video games during the break-in. We built an alibi defense with the friend ready to testify. In court, the prosecution presented a pawn shop receipt with his signature, dated the same day, selling items stolen from the house. He didn't mention pawning anything, claiming he, quote, it was unrelated. The alibi fell apart, and he took a plea. Story 67. In a personal injury case, my client claimed a workplace accident caused permanent wrist damage, preventing her from typing and working her office job. We had medical testimony lined up. The defense showed LinkedIn posts where she bragged about winning a regional typing speed competition post-accident. She didn't tell me, saying it was just for fun. The case settled for far less than we aimed for. Story 68. I represented a client in a divorce, fighting for a fair split of marital assets. He insisted he had no hidden accounts or income. During the hearing, his wife's attorney produced bank statements showing he'd been funneling money into an offshore account for 2 years. He claimed he forgot about it because it was for emergencies. The judge awarded her a larger share due to his deception. Story 69. In a vandalism case, my client, a teenager, claimed he was wrongly accused of keying a neighbor's car. We prepared a defense around lack of evidence. At trial, the prosecution showed a group chat where he boasted about scratching up the car as revenge for a noise complaint. He didn't mention the chat, thinking it was just talk. He got probation after a quick plea. Story 70. I was handling a wrongful termination case where my client said he was fired for reporting safety violations. He presented himself as a model employee. The employer's attorney revealed he'd been caught on camera sleeping on the job multiple times, which he never disclosed. He said he, quote, didn't think it mattered, since it was just naps. The case was dismissed. Story 71. In a tenant dispute, my client claimed the landlord failed to maintain the property, causing water damage to his belongings. We were set to argue negligence. The landlord's attorney produced a maintenance log showing my client refused access for repairs multiple times. He didn't mention this, saying he was too busy to let them in. The judge ruled against us. Story 72. I defended a client charged with substance possession, who claimed the substances found in his car belonged to a friend. We built a defense around lack of knowledge. During trial, the prosecution played a recorded jail call, where he told his friend he hid the substances under the seat. He didn't tell me about the call, thinking it wouldn't come up. He took a plea deal. Story 73. In a car accident lawsuit, my client claimed the crash caused severe migraines, impacting her quality of life. She didn't mention she'd been prescribed medication for chronic migraines for years before the accident. The defense brought medical records showing this, undermining her claim. She said she forgot because she was used to the headaches. We settled for minimal damages. Story 74. I represented a client in a fraud case involving fake invoices to a client company. He swore he was just following orders from his boss. During discovery, the prosecution produced emails where he suggested creating the fake invoices to inflate profits. He didn't share the emails, claiming they were just ideas. We had to negotiate a plea to reduce charges. Story 75. In a custody case, my client, a father, claimed he was the more responsible parent and should have primary custody. He didn't mention he'd recently lost his driver's license for reckless driving after speeding with the kids in the car. The mother's attorney brought this up with court records. He thought it wasn't a big deal, since no one was hurt. He got limited visitation. This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education.